All right. I'm here with Ingrid Vanderveldt, and she is the CEO and founder at EBW Worldwide. How's it going, Ingrid?
Good. How are you, Stephen? It's nice to see you.
Yeah. It's
Thanks
great
for
to
having
connect.
me.
Yeah, of course, of course. I'm excited to unpack multiple successes here, but before we get there, let's talk about your background. What got you started?
Oh my gosh, what got me started? Well, my father was an entrepreneur and then my mother was a psychologist. So put those two together and in our family, she came from a medical family and then my father's family is all entrepreneurs. So we were either going to be doctors or entrepreneurs. So that's really what got me going. But I will say when I came to business school in Austin, Texas, and I saw Michael Dell building a multi-billion dollar company out of the trunk of his car. I just at that time, I was really young and watching this, and I was like, we need a female version of Michael Dell. And had no idea that I would get as involved in tech as I've, built my career on. But that's what got me started. I really was inspired by what he was able to do as an entrepreneur. And I wanted to build a tech company that had the potential to do the same. So that's really what got me started.
Nice, nice. And I've noticed this sort of characteristic of a lot of people with success and multiple successes in the background, in that they've either worked for someone or worked alongside someone when they were younger and getting in the groove of tech or their career. And I think that that's like the best crash course education you can have is somebody that's just a beast like Dell getting in
Oh,
there early and seeing
oh,
it.
100%. We were just talking about your producer, Melanie, and she had sent over some questions before you and I got on here. One of them was just talking about mentorship and sort of the number one piece of advice, if you will, that I have for any entrepreneur. And it's exactly what you just said.
Hmm.
And that is having a beast of a mentor who believes in what it is that you're doing, that you can work with, and who will show you the ropes, who doesn't just give you advice, but actually picks up the phone and helps you make things happen. And I mentioned Michael Dell, and the funny thing about it was when I was inspired on the vision to build my first tech company, I did want to work with Michael Dell, but not in Dell.
Hmm.
And I knew Michael was just so busy at the time, and it just so happens that the benefactor of our business school, Dr. George Kosmetsky, was Michael Dell's mentor and was one of the first investors in Dell. And so I went and had a conversation with Dr. K, and I was like, I know Michael's too busy, but maybe you have a little bit of time for me. And it was Dr. K who took me on as his mentee. He believed in the power of women as leaders. And at the time I got involved in tech, there was like one other woman here in Austin, Texas, running a tech company. So he saw that potential to see what we might be able to do together. And he taught me the ropes. I mean, that was a self made multi billionaire that grew up so poor he had, holes in the bottom of his shoes kind of thing. And he was able to start a company called Teledyne, and then he funded Dell and Oracle. And then when he passed on, his best friend was Red McCombs, who founded what's now iHeartMedia, and he owned the Vikings, and another self made multi billionaire. And he called me up and said, well, Ingrid, in his big Texas accent, I've heard all about you and I've heard good things and I want to take you under my wing. And that was Red McCombs, Big Red. And so I became his mentee. He passed on a couple years ago, but I always joked with Michael. I was like, I wanted to be the female version of Michael Dell. And I was like, I ended up working for Michael Dell as the first entrepreneur in residence of Dell. He didn't work for me, I worked for him. So hats off to him. But yeah, it makes a huge, it is the game changer when you have the right mentor in place.
Hmm. For sure. And I want to, you touched on it briefly there, but let's talk about the businesses that you've built. Like you were at Dell, and what happens next? What was the first venture there?
Yeah, well, what I'd say there, it actually started before that. So the first venture that I built, the one that I was inspired on because of Michael, was back in the day. I mean, this is now many years ago. Dot com boom, all of that. And the web at the time, I mean, this sounds so ancient and dinosaur-y like, But I think it's important to hear these stories too. Like, how did it actually happen? The web was really pretty difficult, if you will, to navigate at the time. And so I was inspired to essentially create software, create algorithms that would personalize use of the web. So when you get on the web, and today it's old school stuff, but you'd say, the web comes back and says, hey, Steven, saw you were looking at this, thought you might like this. And it's doing real-time data analytics on the back end to personalize that experience for you. So that was my first tech company. I actually was using AI back in the day when nobody even knew what it was. I was using neural nets at the time, and I built an algorithm or algorithms that would personalize the web. So that was my first venture, and also first exit. So from there, went on to build a media venture, ended up being CNBC's first original primetime series host, and also in the business producing the show. So that was interesting. The show was fantastic, but we were losing business, or losing money, I should say, as a company. So we couldn't continue that show, but it was awesome. Went into green tech for a while, had an exit there. I was working with another founder. And then that led to Dell. And when I was at Dell, I went to Dell because I was inspired on the vision to do the work that we do today, which is empowering 1 billion women. At the time, it was by 2020. I knew I needed a global tech partner to make it happen, to help me make it happen, and to help me also learn how do you build infrastructure that could reach this many people, this quickly, and really provide them access to opportunity that would help them grow. And thank God for Michael's visionary thinking, and a guy named Steve Felice, who's an investor in EBW today, who was president of Dell at the time, and they saw the potential to work together. Mm-hmm. So I became the first entrepreneur in residence of Dell, overseeing entrepreneurship and innovation initiatives globally. Built our first $100 million debt fund, which became a $250 million fund. Built what tracked to $1 billion net new business for Dell on a 2.5% OPEX, so had some great success there. And then left Dell to start EBW. I'll skip details unless we want to go into that. But the fast forward there, I will say during COVID, in serving women all over the world, business owners, with EBW, a lot of people were struggling. We were too. And I was really concerned about the business. I was concerned about their businesses. And because half my family's in healthcare, as I mentioned at the beginning, during COVID, anyone at the time, I think, that has access to a really large network, we were all getting phone calls. Can you help us? Can you help us get access to supplies, those kinds of things? We ended up getting into that business, and I built a vertically integrated supply chain using data, personalization, analytics, all of that on the back end. And that company ended up, it's a subsidiary of EBW, became the 28th fastest growing company in America, and we ended up selling that business. And so today I'm back at the original vision of EBW, if you will, which is to update and finalize the tech platform that we have been building to personalize the experience for women business owners around the world to gain access to contracts, capital, and opportunity.
Very
and
cool.
You all are getting a tour around my little office here with our dogs coming in and out. Hopefully that gives a good overview.
Yeah, that was great. That actually segued into my next question here around access. I think it's something that has come up on this podcast many, many times about the discrepancy of, women only getting 2% or 3% of venture capital out there. And there's been a lot of really good theories, ideas that people have bounced around on this podcast specifically, and that I've heard all over the place. But I'm curious to get your take on it, because you're literally providing a lot of these resources to female entrepreneurs. But how do you think around kind of shrinking this gap, like getting more access to women in general as they're running their businesses, getting them access to capital? How do you see that happening?
Well, part of it, and I can talk about this from experience, and I can say this, and as a guy, and I always say, like, we do the work that we do today, but I wouldn't be where I am, if it wasn't for an exceptional group of guys who really provided that seat at the table. I still had to do the work and show up and roll up my sleeves and work really, really hard to get where I've been able to get. But it's the guys who made that happen. And even today, I love doing business with the guys because men and women tend to do business very, very differently. And what I experienced, just to kind of give a little bit of context, because hopefully this will resonate with some of your listeners, but I learned the hard way what the issue really is when it comes to women and access to contracts and capital and venture financing and all of that. The stats are what they are. Women tend to generate 12% higher revenue, 35% higher return on investment. So from a fact-based number standpoint, women tend to outperform the guys. And frankly, I think it comes down to we're just so darn happy to have the opportunity. We're going to bust through walls to make sure we figure this out. But where the real issue comes in is actually showing up in the first place. And I know a lot of women are probably going to listen to this and say, that's not true, that's not the case. My experience with it is my entire career up and through Dell was pretty much working with the guys in tech. And then when I went to Dell, it was pretty much split half and half, men and women. And we were so successful in the things that we built at Dell that when I left Dell and started EBW, I was like, what is the fastest path to onboard 1 billion women, right, onto this new platform? And I went for the jugular, which is women were saying the biggest issue holding us back is lack of access to capital. So I teamed back up with Dell. I literally launched a $100 million fund by and for women entrepreneurs. And for the next 90 days, not a single woman applied, the guys did. And it literally in the byline of the fund, it was called the Ivy Fund, by and for women entrepreneurs. And I really wanted to quit. I was mad. I was really mad because I had a bunch of corporations like Dell, not Dell, but similar companies that were throwing a lot of money at me to come and do the same kind of things for them that I had been able to do with Dell. But I had made this commitment to really dedicate my life to solving the issue of that access to capital for women because I've been so blessed. And I'm a very faith-focused person, and this really is a faith calling on my life, to be very transparent about that. And I just knew if I did not roll up my sleeves and figure out at the time, like, why was this actually happening when somebody like myself who's dedicated my life, and I'm one of you, ladies, right? And I know how hard this is. And if I'm setting up the fund and you're not even showing up, why did that happen? What it boils down to, honestly, is what it boils down to is the confidence issue. And again, I know I'm going to get a bunch of arrows, thrown at me for that. But there's a reason they wrote the book, The Confidence Gap. And there's a reason you hear the stories like, if there's a job opening and there are 10 boxes you have to fill, guys will be like, well, I checked 3 of those, so I'm going to go apply, right? And then when it comes to women, like, we want to check off every single box before we'll go for it. And if you apply that same kind of thinking to a global ecosystem that the guys essentially, you guys have created so much of that, and you've been doing business together, and you know how things work, and you know who to call for whatever. It's not that way for women. And, we don't want you to know what it is that we don't know, right? So instead, oftentimes, we don't even show up. Now, I will say this. COVID, thankfully, like, one of the amazing things out of COVID is it changed the mindset, in my experience of working with women around the world, significantly. Because there was one month, it was November of 2020, and it's hard to believe this, but if you go back and look at the reports, in November 2020 in the United States anyway, they said 100% of the job losses were women. And I was like, that's really hard to believe, but let's just roll with that for a second, right? So now you've got all these women and the guys, but women who are losing their jobs. And what we experienced was women finally had this, like, I'm just fed up. I don't, for your listeners, and especially the women who have seen the We Do Not Care movement, ladies, you know what I'm talking about. But I feel like there was this whole we do not care sort of mentality that we're going to do whatever it takes now to make sure we can feed our kids, make sure we can do what it is that we want to do in life, and make sure that we too have a seat at the table. So the mindset has shifted a lot, but we still have a lot of work to do. So the numbers, not only have they remained the same, in some cases they've gotten worse. And I think it's on all of us to do our part to bring more women to the table, because frankly, the results are better. You know, we're all going to make more money.
Yeah, that was a very eloquently way of describing what I've often talked about as the napkin concept, where a man will have an idea on a napkin and run into a meeting and go and raise money off of an idea and that confidence of just having nothing really tangible, but the ability to just take that napkin in. And that, I believe you mentioned a book, The Confidence Gap. I'll have to check that out, but it is really boiled down to that willingness to just go into the room with the napkin and not the completed business behind the scenes if you're going to raise money, which I've heard time and time again. But you described it basically exactly as it is, and I've heard multiple times before, for sure.
Well, and I love that you brought up the napkin too, because that's in fact exactly how I raised my first, funding was off a napkin. But I have to say, like, had I not been mentored by George Kosmetsky, I did have guys at the time that, one in particular, Jerry Y, if he's listening, who said to me, "You'll never raise money because you don't look like, act like, sound like, or talk like any of the tech CEOs that are getting funding. And if I were you, I'd go out and try to find a job as fast as you can before you age yourself out of the market." Like, literally, that was his advice. And it was coming from this good place. But if that was the guy, that was sort of the first kind of meaningful feedback I was getting, I might have seen things a little bit differently. But given I was blessed to have George Kosmetsky, who basically taught me that, couple critical things. One, you're the only one that's going to hold yourself back. And two, it's easier to think big than it is to think small. So just think big and go for it, because that circle of people who actually let themselves do that and do deals at that level is so much smaller that by the time you're like talking to somebody like a Michael Dell who can do really big deals, they're looking for other deal makers. And it's why I teach something called the deal maker mindset. Like, this is how it works.
So let's talk a little bit about getting prepared. I think anybody listening to this, I think there's a lot of misconceptions and mistakes that get made when it comes to preparing for an exit. And you've gone through multiple. I'd love to just get your take for male, female entrepreneurs that are listening to this. How can they prepare on day one, or kind of getting ready for an exit?
I think there are three really big things. First and foremost, one is to be really clear on what is the exit that would be an ideal outcome for you. Because, for example, Stephen, if you said, like, if somebody offered me $200,000 versus $20 million, right, over the next 24 months, those are two totally different paths, right? So it's getting very clear on what it is that you ultimately want in the time frame that you want, and then begin to almost pivot how you're doing things to all line up to that goal. The second thing is your team, as you all know, is so critically important. And I'm not just talking about the people that work with you inside the company. I am talking about your support system, your lawyers, your bankers, your financiers, that everybody is on the same page. I always talk about my ride or dies. My accounting firm is Cherry Beckart, and there are partners in there, Amber Teague and Tim Larson, who I'm on the phone with them, if not every day, every other day, for sure. And between them and my lawyers, we're on things every single day to make sure structure's tight, documents are tight, the way we're approaching things is really tight, and they're advising me. Just Friday, we had another call and they made a suggestion on how we should pivot one of the structures that we were building for one of the companies. And I agreed with that. I hadn't thought about what they had suggested. It was a great idea, which leads me to the third thing. And the third thing is be really tight on your paperwork. It sounds like, oh my God, this is like the most boring thing to talk about. But I can tell you from personal experience of having really great, almost effortless kind of exits. Nothing's effortless. It's a lot of work. But how things should flow. And then if your paperwork isn't tight, and by paperwork, I mean, what do your operating agreements look like? Is everybody on your team on the same page? Is the buyer on the same page? Are we absolutely making sure we're saying the same things? Because I have one deal right now that we thought everything was super tight, and we realized that, there were a couple areas that could have been a lot clearer, and now we're in negotiations about those things when we should all be happy and just moving things forward. So those things are really, really, really important. Be clear on your goal, make sure you have the right support team around you, make sure your paperwork is super tight.
Well said. So let's shift to negotiations and all the juicy around valuation. So what kind of tips can you share for, let's say, a woman listening to this? Currently, she's crushing it. She's got everything organized. She's prepared. She's ready to go. What can you share around how she could put her best foot forward when it comes to negotiations?
Yeah. So back to the comments that I was just making. Your team and the people like that, well, first of all, having the right mentor, like somebody who has done it. And I know we'll talk into the work that we do today as well, but it's why we do the work that we do, because I know the kind of mentorship that I have, and I've been blessed to have, is so rare for a lot of founders and absolutely for women. And so sharing that knowledge is really, really critical. So having that right mentor who has been there and done that and has your back is so, so key. The second thing, I know I talked about team, but where I want to kind of bring that home on this point specifically is think about if you were at a Sotheby's art auction. Do you remember like a year or two ago, like some dude made $5 million selling a banana he taped to like a canvas? Okay, remember that? And I might have the number wrong, but it was definitely millions of dollars. Okay. If that guy, that artist, was the one who got up on stage and was like, I have a banana taped to a canvas and here's why I did it. Okay, what he would have gotten paid for that versus the Sotheby's person who was like, look at this, and this is so amazing because of X, Y, and Z. That matters. You have to be able to step up to the table to be prepared to handle the negotiation yourself. But having that ride or die partner who is doing it on your behalf, who can negotiate on your behalf, you're going to get a completely different valuation on that front. And then finally, again, related to that in the paperwork, my husband, I told you, has a golf company, and so we watch a lot of golf. And I always think about like the caddies and the golfers, right? And what was it? Who's that golfer years ago who his caddy was sick or had something he had to do, and so he got a temp guy, ends up winning the tournament, made a whole bunch of money, and then got hammered in the media because he basically paid the caddy what he agreed to pay, like $75,000 or something, but not a percentage of earnings. Why? Because the paperwork wasn't clear right up front. So it's like, make sure when you have your Sotheby's like representative with you, it's super clear what the agreements are so that you can just go in and focus on execution.
Yeah, I like that you've emphasized team multiple times, and not necessarily like, of course, the team in the business itself is key and crucial to operating, but just the people around you, including mentors, your accountants, lawyers, people who have gone through it before. I think that is like an often understated concept of just having people around you that know what they're doing, and they've seen it, they've done it, they have horror stories and the scars to show. I think that is a really great point. So that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell Ingrid 10 years ago?
What I would tell Ingrid 10 years ago, so first and foremost, I was very blessed to have the right mentors 10 years ago. Then I would tell her, if this is going to be a self-promotion thing, but it's coming from a place of fact, like literally all the things that I wish I would have had and I wish I would have known. I've spent a career building, we just finished our product at EBW One, but it is basically the luxury of billion-dollar mentorship made affordable. So, and it's open to men and women. We target women. But 10 years ago, if this existed then, I'd be like, stop number one is go in there and we have something called the One Badge, get in there and get access, because everything is teaching you. We've used data, tech, and AI to gamify the process of understanding exactly where you're at if you're just starting, your first time entrepreneur, or maybe you're we've got doctors, we've got the Microsoft lady who's in here. She works at Microsoft and she's got a side hustle. She's never built an entrepreneurial venture. Her mindset and a fresh founder versus somebody who's had a successful exit, who's building their next venture, who might already be at $1 million. Those are very different approaches to how you build. So I'd be saying get on that, because that's going to give you what you need to be successful at what it is you want to do.
Well said. Well said. So that takes us to what you're working on now. Where can people learn more?
Please come to EBW.one. We'd love to have you check it out. We just finished. We just filed for the patents back on May 27th. And 2 weeks ago, we just filed for the trademark. So up until now, everything that we've done as a business has been building companies or manuals, consulting, mentorship, all of that. We had chapters and content, all of that. But to now have, productize it in a way that makes access to, personalized access to opportunity, contracts, and capital, makes that affordable for serious entrepreneurs who really want to start, grow, and scale and ultimately exit. That's why we built it. So, come check it out. And I really appreciate you guys at Flippa and all of the work that you all are doing to make it easier for entrepreneurs to have that place and that advice and things like this podcast to learn how do we get the most out of what it is that we're doing, and how do we have that successful exit. So I really appreciate you guys having me.
For sure, for sure. Well, wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, the links that Ingrid mentioned will be in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.